Hey guys, welcome back to Andy's Dinosaur Reviews, and today we've got ourselves the fourth of the brand new 2023 Schleich releases, and we've got ourselves a Jurassic World Evolution Edmontosaurus. Okay, well, it's not exactly an official Jurassic World Evolution Edmontosaurus, but it is really clear to me where Schleich got their inspiration from, because not only does the sculpt appear, kind of similar to a Jurassic World Edmontosaurus, it also looks like it as far as the coloration. Like, not perfect, but they are very obvious where they got their inspiration from for this Edmontosaurus. Overall, though, I think it's a pretty nice looking figure, honestly. I really do like the fact that they chose that coloration because it looks nice on the animal. Like, it really does. It looks nice and natural overall, and Schleich has done a pretty good job as far as the paint application, which is nice because we've had some sloppiness in the line this year as far as the paint applications. If you look back to the Gastonia, that one was pretty sloppy as far as the paintwork goes, but this Edmontosaurus definitely looks a lot nicer as far as the paintwork, except for, I think the only thing I'm really noticing is how weirdly placed this like random transition from the blue is down into the brown. Like, it looks a little bit more like paint than body color right there to me, but it still looks really nice as far as the majority of the figure. It also has that body type where it's kind of looking like really chunky, similar to their Parasaurolophus that they had last year. Like, they have a very specific style to dinosaurs like this as far as the way they sculpt it out. Like, you can really see it over here. It looks like it's just overweight and obviously has a lot going on here in the body as far as, like, you know, skin and just a little bit of weight. Overall, like, you could see some girth in the stomach region. So I guess it is a really well-fed Edmontosaurus. And again, similar to the way that the Parasaurolophus from last year was created. But I actually kind of like it. You know, it's a little different from what you normally see, and that's always a breath of fresh air if you ask me. So definitely a neat looking figure. Let's go ahead and jump straight to a closer look at it right now. So starting up here at the head sculpt, you can see we've got a fairly decent looking head sculpt, some nice looking skin texture throughout the face of the Edmontosaurus. We have a beautiful bluish tone here for the face, and they've highlighted all of the cracks and crevices in the skin texture with a dark wash pretty nicely. You can see a little darkening with a brown up here on the top of the head. You can also see that the beak is painted quite nicely with a gray and also has some nice looking detail within that area. Only the upper part of the beak, though, is painted with that gray. You can obviously see the underside sports that nice lighter brown tone. The nostrils are sculpted nicely, and they're also highlighted with a darker coloration, and the eyes are painted beautifully. I think one thing that Schleich has done a lot this year is just given their dinosaurs, you know, black, glossy eyes, and it works, especially on this one. I think it looks great overall, very lifelike and quite realistic. We've got a crest up here on the top of the head of our Edmontosaurus that as well has some fairly nice looking texturing to it and also contains that dark wash, and you can see again that that is the brownish tone exactly as you see on the Edmontosaurus in Jurassic World Evolution. As you start to move down the course of the neck, you continue to see skin texture as well as again that bluish tone, but that bluish tone starts to sort of disappear. And you know, at first I thought that it looked a little, see, like over here it looks better. It's not incredible, but it looks a little smoother as far as the way it kind of transitions away. Whereas over here, although it looks okay, it just kind of looks a little bit weird to me. I'm honestly not sure what it is about that area. It's hard to put my finger on exactly what looks off about it, but it doesn't look terrible. It's definitely nothing major to complain about. It's just a very, very slight nitpick. At the same time, again, you start to see that blue taper off and disappear as we transition primarily to a brown tone for the body, and you again have that dark wash that pretty much overtakes the entire body. But unlike the Gastonia, it's not overly dark, it's not like overly applied. It's a much more subtle application of a dark wash. You can see some skin wrinkles and skin folds and stuff as you move down the course of the throat. Maybe not exactly how I would expect the throat of an Edmontosaurus to look, but there are quite a bit of skin wrinkles and skin folds going on as you move down the course of the underside of the Edmontosaurus. You can also see the shoulder blade and the entire bone structure of the leg here as you move down, looking very, very oddly shrink-wrapped, but you can see again a little bit larger as far as the skin detail right there, like scale detail in the upper part of the leg as you move down, and then as you move down you can take note to the elbow right there, as well as just generally like the bone structure looks really good. Like you can really pick up on the bones underneath the skin, which is pretty cool to see. As you move down, you have some fairly nicely sculpted toes as the Edmontosaurus smacks the camera with its snout. You can see they are painted with a gray. Oddly enough though, there's a nail right here that they chose not to paint. I don't know if that was just a pure accident or what, but they chose not to paint that one. Trying to see what's going on over here. Yeah, same deal. They didn't paint that one either, so I'm not too sure why, but they chose not to paint that nail. But as you move back up here into the stomach region, this is again where the girth really starts to show up, and you can again see just almost like an obese appearance to this Edmontosaurus, similar to the way the Parasaurolophus looked last year. You can also pick up on like osteoderms and stuff throughout the course of the Edmontosaurus, quite nicely placed all over the dinosaur, and you start to see this dark brown design pick up again, very similar to the Jurassic World Evolution version of an Edmontosaurus, but it looks really nice. It's almost a little bit of a glossy brown that they've used, but it's not too glossy, and it's not something that looks super off on the figure. It actually helps it, honestly, to stand out quite nicely, and the application of that paint looks pretty good as well. You also start to see ridges picking up here, running along the back of the Edmontosaurus. They obviously start very small and gain a good bit of size as they move on, but then they kind of stay around a steady size moving through as they begin to taper off again, leading out into the tail. But again, you can see like a big area of girth here in the stomach region as the dinosaur's kind of walking along. It's sort of trying to show off the movement of the Edmontosaurus, but it just looks quite fat to me. But as you move over here, you can kind of make out the hip bone up here, but you can definitely make out the muscle definition of the thigh quite a bit nicer. And also, again, you can see the hip bone a little bit right there. As you move down, you've got the calf muscle. You again have more of that brown, that darker brown designing down through the leg, kind of leading down into the knee before disappearing. You can see a little osteoderm right there again. All of the cracks and crevices of the skin texture are absolutely beautifully highlighted with the way that they've applied the dark wash. I really, really think that the Gastonia could have benefited quite nicely from a dark wash similar to this. But as you move back down here again to the foot, you can see some pretty nicely sculpted out toes, as well as the nails again painted with that light gray, which I think look pretty nice. And then as you lead up here into the tail, you continue to see that same style of skin texture throughout, a few more osteoderms poking up here and there, as well as again that darker brown sort of designing as you move out the length of the tail. You also have a mountain of weird skin wrinkles and skin folds here running along the underside of the Edmontosaurus. I think it looks okay here on the underside of the stomach and stuff, and a little weird as you lead up here into the chest. Like, there are just so many skin wrinkles there. It also looks a little bit strange as you lead out into the underside of the tail. But as you lead out the length of the tail, you do have a slight curve, nothing major, just a really slight curve. You can also see those ridges running along the back taper off, and it's nice and smooth here as you lead out to the end of the tail. You can also see the tip of the tail darken a little bit leading out there. I feel like the tip of the tail is a little bulky compared to the way it probably should be, but it doesn't look terrible by any means. As we look over here, you can obviously see the opposing side of the head is looking away from us now. You can see the dinosaur has a nice left turn to it, and also looking up a little bit. I'm not too sure what our Edmontosaurus is looking at, but it's definitely looking in an upward position. Maybe there's some sort of a larger dinosaur walking by that has caught its attention. Moving down into the neck, you can again see more kind of tensing in the neck. You can also really make out the shoulder blade yet again over here on this side. You've got a pretty nice looking sculpt of this leg again as you move down. Really kind of interesting looking skin texture. It almost looks like a muddy area that dries up and then it gets all cracked and weird looking, and that kind of is the way that the skin texture looks on the Edmontosaurus. Definitely becomes a little bit more fine as you move down here into the front limb, though. You again have the toes and nicely painted nails. As you move back up here into the stomach, you can yet again see the massive girth of our Edmontosaurus, but again, the paintwork looks so good on this as far as the light brown tone and that dark wash just highlighting each and every crack and crevice so beautifully. They really did do a great job on the paint of this one. And then as you continue to move back, first of all, actually you can see tons of like skin wrinkles, skin folds, and just in general the gut of our Edmontosaurus kind of bulging there as the leg is pushing into it. But as you move up here, you can again make out the hip bone, again the very, very large thigh moving down, as well as again the fact that that dark brown paint starts to disappear as you move toward the knee. You can make out the knee itself, and then as you lead down, you again have a pretty nice looking foot sculpt to the Edmontosaurus, and then you lead back up again into the tail. As we lead out the length of the tail, you can see that that dark brown tapers off as the tail darkens toward the tip. So it's obviously not the best Edmontosaurus ever. There's just a few others that I would absolutely rate higher than this one, but it is still pretty nice. Like, for a Schleich release, it's definitely a cool Edmontosaurus, and I'm loving the fact that we've had so many Edmontosaurus figures over the last few years from so many companies. We have a Safari LTD version, we've got a Collect Day version, we also had the Ancestors line version, and now we've got this one as well. And yet again, it's pretty nice. And just like with the Edmontosaurus figures that I had just mentioned, it is quite large. Definitely the biggest Schleich figure for 2023 as far as the prehistoric line goes. You were looking at lengthwise right around 11 3/4 inches, or about just shy of about 30 centimeters, like just barely under 30 centimeters. And the highest point is definitely the tip of the tail. The head, the crest, doesn't look like it's quite as large. You're looking at about 4 3/4 inches, or around 12 centimeters to the tip of the tail. For a size comparison, there is Mr. Papo T-Rex, the Attack Pack Colovosaurus, and Robert Muldoon from the Mattel Jurassic World toy line next to our Edmontosaurus here. And you can definitely see again what I was talking about. It's pretty big, definitely very sizable, especially for a modern day Schleich figure, because we don't get too many large ones from Schleich nowadays. So it is nice to see this larger version of the Edmontosaurus here, which the Edmontosaurus is a pretty big species, so it is definitely nice to see a larger version of it. And then when it comes to a size comparison for the Mattel version of the Edmontosaurus, you can definitely see that they're fairly similar in size. The Schleich version definitely wins overall in length, but body mass, I think, would go to the Mattel version. But for another comparison, there is the Collect Day version of the Edmontosaurus, looking like it's about to try taking a bite out of the face of the Schleich version. But you can definitely see that the Collect Day version is untouched in the size department when it comes to the comparison with the Schleich version. It's definitely bigger than the Schleich version is for sure. For another comparison, there is the Safari LTD version of the Edmontosaurus next to the Schleich version. Now we can definitely see this version is a bit smaller than the Schleich version. But for yet another Edmontosaurus, there is the Ancestors line version, and you can definitely see the Ancestors line version now is larger than the Schleich version. So one thing we can see is that the sizes of different Edmontosaurus figures kind of increase and decrease as we go, but one thing that has definitely remained the same through the entire comparison process is the fact that the Schleich version still has some pretty good size to it. Even if it's a little smaller than some others like this and the Collect Day version, it still has a pretty decent size to it overall. And for one final comparison, here is the Parasaurolophus I was speaking of from last year when it comes to the Schleich line next to the Edmontosaurus. And you can definitely see again that same style of like the chunky body that they clearly like to give to these type of figures. So I'm going to go ahead and say that the sculptor that sculpted the Parasaurolophus last year is probably responsible for the Edmontosaurus of this year. So this brand new 2023 Schleich Edmontosaurus is actually quite nice. It's definitely a pretty cool looking figure, has a very nice appealing kind of walking pose to it, and overall has just a very nice Jurassic World evolution style appearance to it, which I do quite like. The sculpt does have some pretty darn nice looking detail throughout, very highly detailed overall. Maybe not my first choice as far as texturing goes on at Edmontosaurus, but it looks good for what it is. Again, the pose is pretty nice, nothing flashy or crazy, just walking along on all fours, which is nice to see. The paint job as well is pretty darn nicely done overall. I love the dark wash they've applied. They've also done some really subtle areas of shading with an airbrush, and of course we have the nice designing throughout. The only area of paint that's a little iffy for me is the lack of paint on the one claw on each side of the front leg, and also the fact that we have that bluish coloration, looking a little awkward with the way it transitions away on one side. But again, those are super minor nitpicks, stuff that isn't a big deal, so it's not like it's a major complaint about the figure at all. Other than that, I think the actual coloration of the Edmontosaurus is great, and the application as well is quite beautifully done. The size is also quite impressive overall. It has a pretty decent size to it, and is definitely one of the bigger Schleich dinosaurs to come along in quite some time. And actually, going back to the sculpt, the only other thing that I think is a little off about the sculpt is the awkward skin wrinkles on the underside of the dinosaur. They just look a little strange to me. But again, outside of that, it is a pretty darn nice figure, and definitely cool to see Schleich releasing an Edmontosaurus now in 2023. So if you are interested in this, I will include a link in the description to where you can pick this up on the Schleich website. So make sure you check that link, go grab this Edmontosaurus while it's in stock, and like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next review. Thanks for watching.